Good morning, everybody. We welcome you to our Bible study this morning, March 3rd, 2018. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And this morning, our moderator is Tom from New York.
So take it away.
Good morning. So I'll read the quote that we have here. Not far from Mary Bakeretti's home in North Groton, which is when she was married to Dr. Daniel Patterson, and she was then known as Mary Patterson, there lived a retired minister, a devout old man, well over 90. He was known as Father Merrill, and day after day he would walk over to her home to visit her, as she was bedridden most of the time, and the two would read the Bible and pray together. One day, as he turned in at the gate from the road, to his complete surprise, he looked up and saw Mary, all smiles and with arms outstretched, coming down the path to meet him. With Father Merrill, there was no doubt as to what had happened. He cried out at once with joy, "Praise God, He has answered our prayer." So this is from the book Mrs. Eddy, Her Life, Her Work, and Her Place in History by Hugh A. Studdard Kennedy.
Thank you. That's a beautiful book, and that's a beautiful quote you chose for us. Thank you, Tom. Isn't that wonderful? What a story. We should have that in our magazine.
Any other thoughts on this?
Well, God was looking out for her even when she was married to Dr. Patterson.
And what a proof of reading the Bible every day and praying like that. What a proof of its healing power. You know, how often people do this when they're ill? Are they turning to the Bible, praying, reading every day?
And do we trust our prayers?
Right. And he knew right away that it was God that did it. And it just makes me think about all the times that Jesus had to put people out of the room who were thinking like contrary to what the truth was. He was there with her, and obviously he was not thinking contrary. Good thing that was.
Here was a man that was over 90, and he was still active in his life purpose.
And that goes along with our calendar statement for today. God is the only lawmaker for man.
Thank you.
That's right.
Also, I think Mrs. Eddy said truth has a healing effect even when not understood all the way. I'm not quoting it, but I kind of remember reading something like that even if we don't understand it at the time, truth is the truth, and it does heal.
That's absolutely right. Thank you.
There were a couple of quotes I took from Matthew Henry in doing the Bible study questions, and the first is, "Those that will be constant followers of Christ shall have him a constant guide to them." And also, "We must do our duty and then leave the event to God." They were doing their duty. They were putting it in God's hands, and they expected good.
Yes, thank you.
They were trusting God.
And, you know, when Mrs. Eddy took that bad fall and they thought she was going to die, it was reading the Bible that cured her. There's power, and she knew that. There's power in the Bible. And she knew it, and that's why she studied it so thoroughly before she wrote Science and Health. And the two were hand-in-hand companions. But the Bible must never be left out. And we must guard it now as our country becomes more and more secular, that we turn more and more to its pages. Now when someone's sick, the first thing they do, they Google symptoms, and then they go and get some kind of
Look for a pill.
look for the pill.
Okay, that's great. I might also add, never give up.
And also, patience will have her perfect work.
Thank you. I was waiting for someone to say that.
Well, I was going to say patience must have her perfect work.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
Okay, so our topic today is fishers of men, and as people wonder about that, that's fishers of all people. Okay, so
Generic.
our readings. Pardon me.
Generic men.
So our readings coming from the lesson today in Luke 5. Also have a story is told in Matthew and Mark. That was for readings. First couple questions, just put the story in the context and kind of make sure we know some of the Bible information, and then we'll kind of dig into our Bible study. So, when did this story take place?
Well, it would be at the beginning of Jesus' career. He had gone through the temptations and had been baptized by John. In one of the stories, I think it was in Luke, it took, maybe not Luke, it was after he healed Simon Peter's mother of a fever.
And it was after John had been put in prison.
Thank you.
And he didn't really know these disciples well then. Sure, they had seen some of his healing work, but they were not yet disciples, as we know. But
Because we had
all of this is very interesting, Tom. These questions are very interesting, and also the fact to read the three stories of the same event tells you much.
He had just come down from having the temptations, and he went into Galilee, to Nazareth, where he had grown up. And that's when he went into the synagogue and stood up to read.
That's right. That's good.
That's
So
Luke.
sort of recap that. So we talked about some said that he was baptized by John the Baptist. Wasn't mentioned, but he went in the wilderness. That was his time in the wilderness. He was also at the time that John the Baptist is in prison. He had gone back to Nazareth and spoke in the synagogue, and then he had left and gone to Capernaum, in Upper Galilee near the Sea of Galilee, and was there preaching.
And healed Peter's mother-in-law of a fever.
Right. So, who were the four fishermen, and which ones were brothers?
Simon and Andrew are brothers.
James and John were brothers.
Yeah, they were the sons of Zebedee who had a fishing business. So they went out on one boat.
So what do we know about the four fishermen? Any interesting information about them?
Well, Simon became known as Peter, Petrus. And he was like the chief apostle.
Well, they had kind of grown up together. They were family friends, and they were and they had boats. They were fishermen professionally. That was how they earned their living.
They weren't afraid of hard work. That's what I took from them, toiling all night. They will keep at it as long as it takes.
Sounded like they had kind of a partnership going too. Probably an informal partnership that they worked together, obviously cooperated and worked together.
Betty?
Andrew had brought, I think he was, they had been disciples or been taught by John the Baptist, and Andrew actually had, they had pointed out, Jesus, well, there's the Lamb of God, and Andrew went and got his brother Simon, Peter, and brought him in to Jesus. And I guess Andrew had also brought some other people to Jesus as well. I think there was some Greeks, and there was I can't remember the other, but he was actually the first one who had met Jesus.
So what else? I mean, fishing was all in the family. John and James' father was a fisherman.
It seemed to me that they depended on material means. They had to fix their nets, and they would go out and toil and work, and they would try their best to catch as many fish, and sometimes they weren't very successful. They'd come back with nothing, and it was hard.
I think it's also interesting. I read that Peter was married. Simon Peter was married. So when he left, he just left like that. I mean, makes you what great faith to follow and leave everything behind.
Yeah, it's not that they didn't have anything to leave behind. They did. They had looks like a successful fishing business, and James and his brother John left their father Zebedee and the hired servants on the boat. It said they dropped everything to follow Jesus. It was a huge calling. And as I said, they must have been observing what he was doing and greatly affected and influenced by the healing work of Jesus. It did not go unnoticed to them. And the fact, I think we talked about this once before, but the fact that Jesus had the temptations and all the things he went through, he was in a very glorified state of mind when he, as he always was, but particularly he was picking out his disciples. He knew which ones to pick. Wasn't a big question mark in his mind. And just as Mrs. Eddy, who did she say were her best workers? The housewives.
The housewives.
Yes, the housewives. Because they were humble and simple and didn't think they knew so much. Just as that, Jesus picked the humble fishermen who worked hard and simple. He saw in them something good.
They had the pure, simple faith, too.
Yes, they did.
Well, we know it's quite remarkable, but so these are just, as we're talking about, hard-working fishermen. And John, later wrote the Gospel of John. It's quite remarkable. He was a fisherman. Beautiful, beautiful book.
Yes.
Well, it proves you don't have to be at Harvard to write a book, to write good.
And that is exactly right.
And
See where our false values are these days.
yet Jesus didn't recruit at the university where the Pharisees were taught.
We got
That's the opposite.
Right.
I think it shows that wisdom is from God, and we are all, as reflections of His image and likeness, we can all reflect that wisdom and ability to do what He wants us to do.
You know, Mrs. Evans never went to college. She just had a high school education. But she would take on anybody. And she did, successfully. And it was her wisdom. And yes, and very often much smarter and wiser than those who had all these degrees. She could just push them under the bus, so to speak. And she always said, you know, that we have put so much emphasis on all of this education. Our children, they're not going to get a job. They're just going to fail if they don't have all this education, and it's a false trust. I'm not knocking education, but especially though right now, what they're being educated about is sometimes the worst. Dale this week was telling me about the sex education courses in Northern Virginia, and it was appalling what they're teaching these young children. It's censored, or I would tell you. So, education is not what it is once touted to be. We must be very wise and not give it this false God. It is a false God. With God, we know everything we need to know when we need to know it, if we were in that right mind. Of course, Jesus, what education did he have? And even Mrs. Eddy, she
Self-educated.
Yeah, self-educated, and she knew the classics and things. But she said much of what she had to learn once she came upon science, she had to drop and forget. This is our real education. I think if we all studied the Bible instead of looking at those insipid magazines and other things that you buy at the supermarket.
Something else, if you remember the Transfiguration, and who was there? 3 of the fishermen.
Peter was there, I know.
John.
Peter, James, and John.
All but Andrew.
Yeah. Quite something.
Mm-hmm.
There was, one part of this story, too, that I thought was very, very significant, and that is, what is the first request that Jesus made?
Follow him?
No.
He wanted to use Peter's boat to preach, so he wanted him to launch out a little bit so he could preach.
Thank you very much. And how did he ask? What was the specific way that he asked in the lesson?
Well, he seemed humble to me.
No, I'm talking, how did Jesus ask Peter? Did he command him?
They thrust out.
Yes. We prayed him that he would thrust out. What does that mean, he prayed him?
It's like an earnest request. I don't know.
Well, just, yes, very prayerful
Yeah.
request, humble. Jesus was knowing the importance of it. He used wisdom in the way that he asked him, so he wasn't offended. Remember, he had toiled all night. He was probably exhausted. This was probably the last thing he wanted to do. And why did Jesus request this? Why was it important?
There were so many people there.
Yes. He was being thronged. These little verses tell us so much if we think about it. And so he wanted to go out a way so he could speak to all of them, perhaps see them at a better vantage and not have them just all surrounding him. And Peter was willing to do it. And it also tells us that Jesus probably had a very strong, commanding voice because he could preach from the boat. But you might also think, when you have an earnest request of someone, how should you give it?
With love and humbly.
Yes, prayerfully, with love and humbly. That'll make all the difference. You want to know why your children don't obey you? Do you pray through the requests? Or are you just ordering them about?
That's what it says, a few truths tenderly told.
Yes, it's something beautiful from Mrs. Eddy.
A little more grace. I can't remember.
Yes, a little more grace. A few truths tenderly told.
Odor made pure.
Yes.
A few truths tenderly told. A heart softened. A character subdued. A life consecrated.
Thank you, Fairly. It's a good thing to memorize. It is beautiful. Thank you.
Well, and that is what motivated Jesus in everything that he did. He requested it because of his great love for the people who were there to listen to him. God directed him. In other words, divine love directed him to request this of Peter. It was his love for the multitude that was following him that caused him to, that told him to do this.
And this is the first example of Peter's what?
Obedience and trusting.
Yes, immediately. Even though, how would you feel if you'd been out toiling all night and someone asked you to do that? Probably not like.
Well, not only that, but Peter was a fisherman and Jesus was a carpenter's son. So it was kind of, how could a carpenter's son tell a fisherman how to fish? Especially when fishing conditions weren't even right at that point. Peter had to really trust.
That's right. But this first request was just to thrust out and enable Jesus to preach. And he accepted it and did it right away. This lesson is a beautiful lesson on obedience, and Fairly wrote it. And I counted 14 times in Science and Health it was mentioned, at least, maybe more, but at least the word obey and obedience, the importance of it. And Mrs. Eddy sometimes, Mrs. Eddy said, I can't quote this exactly, but she asked someone to do something, and he said, well, Mother, I don't understand. And do you know what she said?
To obey first, and then you would maybe understand later.
Yes, you obey first. You don't wait to try to understand. You just obey. And this is our obedience to God, and in this case to the Master, which Peter humbly and did. So all these little points are so interesting and so important and so informative. Thank you, Tom.
So, and then this is, gets back to what we talked about earlier about Mary Baker Eddy, is that we never give up, She kept reading the Bible and praying, and so that's what we're talking about in obedience. And maybe you don't fully understand, but you're not giving up, and you're continuing with what you think is right.
Yes.
Hold on until you get the blessing.
And remember, it's always darkest before the dawn. I have seen it. Many people giving up right before a blessing was about to occur. And I thought it was interesting. This was in Matthew Henry, where he says, ministers of the gospel must continue to let down their net, though perhaps they have toiled long in the night and have caught nothing. Sometimes you just have to have that patience. You just keep working. You don't look to the left or right. You feel God's inspiring you to do this. You keep at it. God will give the increase. And
can ask ourselves, have I obeyed even the simple truth that He tells me not to be afraid, that He is with me?
Yes.
It makes me think of when I was first doing the YouTube videos. I think it was 10 months I had been doing it, and I don't think we got anybody to watch it. And I had told my practitioner I was thinking about giving up. And then, I don't know, through the conversation it just came up, well, let it go to a full year and we'll see what happens. And then it started coming in. So it made a big difference.
And some of our videos have 12,000 views. And I think how happy Big Nell Young, Mrs. Eddy, others must be, Carpenter, to see the fruits of this going out. People listening. We must be patient with this. God is working.
So we're essentially talking about question 3, so people feel free to jump in. So question 3 is, what were Simon and Andrew struggling with?
So Elizabeth gave a good answer. You want to repeat it, Elizabeth?
Well, I mean, I was saying that Peter was, told to put the boat out and cast down his nets, and he had to really trust. He was a fisherman, and Jesus was a carpenter's son. So it's kind of like a pastor telling a CEO how to run his business. So, and the conditions for fishing weren't even right at that point. So he really had to trust and just be obedient.
Yeah, they'd already spent all night, and they were struggling with the fact that they hadn't caught anything.
And I like that Simon told Jesus, like, the fact of the situation, but then said, okay, at your word, I'll do it. I like that he
right.
put that out there.
No, that's true. Total obedience.
Peter was never afraid to open his mouth.
It could also give us a little background information of their circumstances of their life, because this fishing was their economic enterprise, and they weren't exactly wealthy, because there's a lot of taxes on people for their products and transporting them, and tolls and everything. So to get a few fish would have been very helpful for them financially. They may have been struggling with that too. It's obvious that they felt and knew what Jesus was, what he stood for, that they were willing to obey and follow.
Even when they got all those fish.
Oh my gosh.
Because that would be another temptation. I mean, say you are a CEO and suddenly you get millions of dollars flooding in because you obeyed God. So now you're just going to, excuse me, I'm leaving now. Time to follow the Christ. That must have been a temptation. Here they probably had more fish than they've ever had. It could have been a very lucrative catch. They left it to Zebedee and whoever else was there to do it. They didn't hesitate to leave the success for a much more humbler lifestyle.
Just reminds me of the time when Mrs. Eddy describes her experience when she walked down to her pond and the fish came up to the shoreline right in front of her. So this attraction to the Christ is quite a wonderful thing.
We must always remember, too, that when we do follow the Christ, and are obedient and do the best we can. Our God is an abundant God, not a stingy God. The fish were all there, but we don't think that. If we've had a life of poverty, we expect it to continue rather than to say no. God has all good for all of us. It's what we do with what we get, too. Are we going to follow the Christ and make riches secondary, or are they going to become the God in our life that we worship?
Mrs. Eddy is a great example of that. Proved it.
She is a great example, and I love Florence's story of when she visited Chestnut Hill. And what did you say, Florence?
No, I'm just so impressed with how small her bedroom was, just so simple. But it just strikes you because it's like this grand home, so imposing and all that, and all she had, her bedroom, so small. Only a bed and a dresser, and I don't even think there was anything else there. It just struck me, and I think everybody else that was on that tour.
Mm-hmm. And she wanted it that way.
It proved something to me. I almost wept. Just something. It did something to me.
That there could be no distractions. Only God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The simplicity of Christ. One of the commentators said that you get a degree in neology at the School of Hard Knocks. What is neology? What is neology?
Getting down on your knees.
Praying.
Yeah, even a K. When you get tossed around enough, finally realize you got to get on your knees, take that course in neology.
Stay there.
Stay there. Never get up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's this Charles Stanley. He would say, you stand the tallest on your knees, which I always thought was good.
Well, Andrew had been a disciple of John the Baptist, so he was clearly searching. And Simon.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of what I was getting out of this. That they were searching. Obviously, very hardworking people, because why else would they, be obedient to whatever Jesus asked them to do? And why else would they sit there and listen to him?
Right.
It seems like they were hungering for, spirituality, to know more about God. I mean, I'm kind of reading into this, but there's nothing in this story saying they were rejecting them. And also, I think this story is telling us that they were learning from this.
It also makes me feel like he preached to everyone, and then he immediately demonstrated it, and in an abundance of fish, more fish than they've ever gotten. And so he was trying to impress, the immediate demonstration that this is the truth. Not just talk about it, but his speech was one with his demonstration for everyone, to see and to know that he's.
And why is that? Why was that?
Well, I mean, to me, he was looking for the apostles to follow him and be fishers of men, and instead of a bountiful supply of fish, they would be getting a bountiful supply of men. They would be, catching men with their nets, their preaching of the gospel. And so it was, to me, demonstrating to them the truth of what he was saying.
No, I don't think it was that at all. He wasn't trying to do anything.
Oh.
He was doing exactly what God told him to do. It was God who told him to go out and cast their net. It was God who brought the fish.
That's true. You're right. Thank you for correcting me. Yes.
He wasn't trying to do anything.
No, not as a human, right.
And this is an important point, because a lot of people say they want their family to see the demonstration, and they don't know why they're not making the demonstration. Well, there's no God in that kind of talk.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Jesus standing there, I want everyone to see this demonstration so they'll all follow me. Then he wouldn't have been able to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He was so one with the Father and so obedient to the Father, it happened. And then the question is, so are you willing to be that obedient? Are you willing to forsake everything and follow him? Most of us aren't.
Well, when you do that, you really aren't forsaking anything. You're gaining so much more.
True. But that's hard for some people to understand.
I think we do find when we're at Plainfield and we're working at Plainfield that one does begin to forsake some of the organizations and things that one was doing before, gradually.
You're exactly right, Fairly. It drops off. It does. Family members, friendships, the way you use your lifestyle, things just change because it no longer appeals to you anymore, just as we talked last week about Mrs. Eddy not wanting to go to the World Fair to see the exhibition. She had better work to do than that. If that's all you have to do, then that's fine, but we all actually have much more to do. Lauren?
Yeah, and so do some of the, false beliefs, belief in materia medica, for example, false habits, things that we used to do that would impede our growth.
False habits. Tom talked about how he used to drink so much coffee. That stopped.
We read in Fruitage so much about that, where people have stopped going to the doctor or stopped taking their medication once they found Christian Science.
Yes. The false beliefs are replaced by the understanding. Tomorrow we'll get into that at the round table, because that is the way to have healing in your life. And it's totally by obedience to God, as Gary said. It's not by trying to do all these things, because that does involve human effort. This isn't about you trying to do anything. This is about you being that reflection, as Parson said, that calm reflection of the Christ Spirit, so that God works through you. And there's a big difference. One works and the other doesn't.
That's right. Like they had exhausted all their human, whatever wisdom about how to do the fishing all night. They'd been probably, we should do this, we should do that. We've done this, and nothing.
Yes. One of the commentaries said, when you've toiled all night and are tired, maybe that's just the time Jesus has something to tell you. So listen, and you listen.
Yes. There's another thing. Martha Wilcox says that when you state a truth, the concrete evidence is at hand. I always think that is so good, because it's not in vain, and you may not see the concrete evidence that instant, but it is there.
Thank you. I love Martha Wilcox for that. She's always saying, right thought must manifest itself over and over. Again, where is your expectation of it? Or if you are willfully sinning, you can't declare that and expect it to work. But as long as you are being as obedient as you know how to be, right thought must externalize itself. It will. And as Carol said, it's already there. We just have to have the eyes to see it.
And I thought it was quite telling that this story, this lesson, is on the subject of man. Because this is really telling us what we are, isn't it? If you look at the definition of man in the glossary, it gives you a clue as to why obedience is essential to being what you really are. It says, man, the compound idea of infinite spirit. You're an idea of God. You're not God. The spiritual image and likeness of God. And the full representation of mind. So we're here to represent God. You can't represent him without being obedient to him.
You know, when we first started in church here with Mrs. Evans, and this was before we had a dynamic website, when people had healings through her work, many were not in this area, what would happen?
Would they come to Plainfield?
Yes, they dropped everything and they came to Plainfield. Dropped their homes, they dropped their human reasoning. That's why at one time we had a very full local attendant. So anyway, and I believe that obedience of people coming from all over the country had a big effect on our winning the law case and all that happened here. Because it took a lot, and they didn't say, well, I don't really want to move to New Jersey, or where am I going to live, or, they just dropped it all and came. Is that not true to the people here?
It is true.
It is true. Now there's only a very small group of us left, but I will never forget that, and all those that came found the right home, and everything worked out well, and I mean, even now, today, Jeremy can tell you, coming here, right?
Oh, absolutely. Although I don't know if it's exactly the same, because I just feel like my old life left me with nothing left to go to.
Well,
I thank God for bringing me here, because there was nowhere else to go.
And ultimately,
that's how everybody felt.
That's how everybody felt.
We all felt the same way.
That even when they maybe thought you might have something, it didn't compare. This was the pearl of great price.
I remember struggling, and then when we came here, everything blossomed.
Yes.
It was wonderful, yes, and still is. And purpose to life, a real meaning to life.
So, as I said, we didn't have the internet then, where you can all attend from where you are and participate. But it was quite stirring, and an example that I think is important. And you can all ask yourself, how much are you ready to forsake all and follow Christ? And that answer is between you and your God.
So what did Jesus say to them before they decided to follow him? What did he say?
I will make you fishers
of
men.
That's right. You will become fishers of men.
You'll have something much, much more important than catching fish in the lake.
Yeah, and then I think, wasn't it in Acts where it said Peter preached and 3,000 souls were converted in one day. So that was a true prophecy. And plus, all the others who did the same thing.
Well, John wrote, this is John 6, verse 27, labor not for the meat that perisheth, but for the meat which endureth.
There you go.
So that's what one of the fishers wrote.
When I was looking up this, researching this, and Spurgeon had an article on fishers of men, his whole talk was on follow, and Jesus said to follow me. And I looked up follow, and one of the definitions is to obey. And it's to embrace, to pursue, to imitate, and I think there was one more, to accompany, to go after. And I just thought it was very powerful, and he spoke a lot about that. He said, I will make you fishers of men. You're not going to do it, but you have to follow me. And this whole concept, and Miss Eddy has a lot on following I haven't even begun to look at, but it's such an important word, and it's what you're saying. It's really obedience. So I'm really grateful for this Bible study.
Yeah, I asked Jeremy to put on the website, on the carousel, Mrs. Eddy's article, Obedience. It's one you all should be familiar with. There are many familiar quotes in it, including never absent from your post, never off guard, never ill-humored, never unready to work for God. But she goes into what true obedience is, as well as that article on fidelity also. But yes, she says a great deal about obedience, obeying, and following. And this willingness, she certainly did. She gave up everything to pursue this. And she did it for unselfed, and for not just her generation, but for future generations. And I'd like to, in my reading, in Miscellaneous Writings, on page 318, Mrs. Eddy says, I have a large affection, not alone for my students, but for thy students, for students of the second generation. I cannot but love some of those devoted students better than some of mine, who are less lovable or Christly. This natural affection for goodness must go on ad libitum unto the third and fourth and final generation of those who love God and keep his commandments. Think of that. What is she saying there?
She loves people who are doing good.
And her love is with us every bit right now as it was to her own students. Just take that in for a minute, please.
Think of how much Mrs. Eddy loves you right now. What did Jesus say who his brothers and sisters were?
Those that did the will of us, Father.
So just think of how much Jesus loves you right now.
He said, lo, I will be with you until the end. So Mrs. Eddy is saying here, and Christ Jesus too, that her love is just as strong and just as much now as it was for her own students. So if any of you feel badly that you couldn't take a course from Mrs. Eddy or take her teaching, they are with us right now, and her love is with us right now. And she is still on the field prospering her cause. She says this. So I just thought it was quite wonderful.
Okay. Well, that takes us to question number 4, doesn't it, Tom?
I sort of feel like we've been talking about question 4, but is anything else need to add? Add to that is why did the 4 fishermen follow Jesus?
So why did they?
I think they felt the authority of the Christ. They just knew it, felt it, and went.
Thank you, Shardy.
Thank you.
I think that's a very important point. He created an atmosphere around him where you aren't going to say, no, I'm not doing that.
I also think there has to be portion of it that they previously had been sitting in their boats doing their fishing, thinking, "Is this really it? I feel like I'm here for something more."
Yeah, what's it all about, Alfie?
Well, we can kind of recap it on some of the qualities they expressed. One is, obviously, it looks like they worked hard as they toiled, so they're hard workers. The other quality we talked about, how when Jesus asked them to do something, they were obedient. Okay? And the third thing to think about is Jesus was there and he was preaching and teaching people. Well, they were still there. They didn't leave. And so obviously they were listening to him, absorbing what he was saying. It seems receptive to what he was telling them.
Thank you. Those were excellent. And also, he created an atmosphere that commanded respect and obedience. He saw himself as God's child, and he saw others as God's children. And plus, he knew that this was God's plan, as we talked about earlier. He didn't just randomly pick these fishermen out. So,
and they had been searching for God in their own way, in their own hearts. When they saw Jesus, they recognized God at work. They recognized God working through Jesus. And since they had been searching for God, they found it. They came much closer. They came very close to what they were searching for. That's what they felt in him.
And when he was reading Isaiah in the synagogue, it said when he closed the book and sat down that all the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. It shows the authority that he did have.
Yeah, he knew why he was here, and he didn't shirk. He didn't say, God, I don't think, I'm kind of tired this morning. I don't think I want to do what you want me to do.
and that obedience to God commanded obedience by others. They were very willing to obey because they felt that thought.
So it was there.
On this.
Go ahead, Lynn.
And Jesus brought it out.
Right. That's right. The thought was there.
And one of the things Jesus had to deal with was people having a personal sense of him. Too many times people thought, whoa, this guy is supernatural. This guy is something else. Because he always had to turn them to God. It was God doing all this. He was being obedient. He wasn't trying to do any of this stuff. And that was the great example.
Yeah, to what you're saying about recognizing Jesus, I think in Luke 5, verse 8, where he says, Simon says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." Well, I think he could only saying that because he recognized who Jesus was. And then that's when Jesus said, fear not, and I shall show you how to catch men.
But, yeah,
well, he was saying because he had initially said, Master, we've toiled all night and have taken nothing. But then he said, but I'll do it because you said it. And he felt guilty for that he even objected at the beginning.
So it's a powerful thing to be able to recognize that in yourself. Very powerful.
It is, and that is the power of humility. And you can get rid of any sense of pride. You let in the greatest power, the only power that there really is.
Okay. On the last question, what did Jesus do afterwards? Thought there is if someone would like to, or someone's like to jump in there and say, talk about some of the things that Jesus did, but then kind of what does that mean for us? You know, what are we learning from this? Because now the 4 fishermen are now following Jesus, and Jesus did a few things afterwards, and so what were they?
Well, he healed a leper.
He preached, he healed.
And then?
He went off alone.
And
Right.
He went off alone and did what?
He prayed.
Yes.
Pray.
He always went back to that. Didn't matter how successful he was, or he always went back to keep that humility of prayer. I thought in talking about, you know, the thousands that Peter brought in and all the thousands that came in the beginning of Mrs. Eddy's teaching the truth, writing her textbook. I know now there's a lot of evangelists have thousands and thousands of people joining their ranks. I was talking to Gary about that. And what did you say? About Christian Science.
Well, and the question is, you know, should we be looking for thousands and thousands, you know, to join us? And you know, the evangelists that have thousands of followers are giving them, you know, a watered down version of Christianity. It's a help to most of them. But when you are giving the world the science, the highest revelation, it doesn't come quickly to a lot of people right away. And you shouldn't be discouraged if you don't have hundreds of thousands of followers right away. We should be grateful for every individual who gets it and who, in their own way, lives it and gives it as God directs to those around them.
Thank you.
It should be quality, not quantity.
That's right, and we've known, and even Mrs. Eddy knew, with all the thousands that she had who joined her ranks at that time, there were only a few doing the work. There were only a few who really understood the science and could do the work. And the reason, in Matthew Henry, he said, his seed, Abraham, should be as the sand upon the seashore. And that's in Genesis 22:17. And yet of them, but a remnant shall be saved. And that's Romans 9:27. And that says, though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, a remnant shall be saved. For he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness. So, again, the remnant that's working, that truly understands it, and that's going to do this work. And it does take this kind of sacrificial devotion and forsaking all to do this kind of work. If you just want to be a pleasant Christian Scientist and just split here and there and take it on your terms, well, that's all right, but that's something different. to really devote yourself to this science, that's how the power comes. And that's just the way it is. And this is why we study the Bible, because the answers are in the Bible. The lessons are here. Are we willing to take up the cross, follow the Christ, as these disciples were?
That's why blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. You will be filled.
And eventually, this will lead to the millennium. It will be everyone, everywhere. And in truth, that's now, because the New Jerusalem needs only to be seen and to be ushered in, as John, the disciple, saw and wrote about in Revelation.
So thank you, God, for opening our eyes.
Yes, and thank you, God, for this session. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom, for stepping up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may say, if anybody, felt that there was something they learned from today, whatever that is, about reading the Bible, being obedient, following Jesus, write something up in the forum and let us know about what this meant to you. We'd all appreciate that. We want to know how we're helping other people.
Thank you. That would be so nice. So much of you is given freely. You don't pay for these sessions. Please give back in what ways you can. The forum has been light lately. It shouldn't be up to the same few. Your heart should be overflowing in gratitude. You could always write a few things, just as our Wednesday evening meetings are overflowing. Our heart should overflow, all of you.
And you will receive much, much more than you give when you do so.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. And don't do it for that reason. And don't do it for that reason. You do it because you love God and you are ready to follow Him.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.